Well, everybody, welcome back to our professional development webinar series. Our goal in this series is to provide parish staff and volunteers, as well as diocesan ministers, the formation, the training, and the tools that they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. Today's webinar with Chris Wesley is going to be a guide into a new vision for confirmation preparation. As we all know, confirmation is not graduation, and Chris is going to show us how to make that a reality in our parishes today. So my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at Ave Maria Press, and I'm joined today by Christina Pignon, our Parish Marketing Coordinator.
Hello everyone. Before we begin our webinar, we would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils.
So everyone in the audience is muted today, but you can ask questions, and questions may be sent to Chris using the GoToWebinar panel displayed on your screen here. It's labeled as questions. I'd like to note that this webinar is also being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out to you later this week via email.
And with that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Christopher Wesley. He is a youth ministry coach and consultant with Marathon Youth Ministry. He is a former director of student ministry at Church of the Nativity in Timonium, Maryland. He also serves as the president of the Uncuffed Ministries Board of Directors in Baltimore, Maryland. He has a bachelor's degree in communication arts, electronic media from Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. The author of Rebuilding Youth Ministry, Chris writes content for downloadyouthministry.com. He and his wife, Catherine, have 2 sons and live in Pikesville, Maryland. Chris, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Hey, thank you very much, Christina and Jared, for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be great. So,
all right, well, there you go. Go ahead. Begin when you're ready.
All right. Yeah, so, when it comes to confirmation, it reminds me a lot of the end of my senior year. I'll never forget that last day. I ran to my car. I popped in the CD and blared Alice Cooper's School's Out. You know that song, like, School's Out for Summer? And I remember shouting along, no more pencils and no more books, no more teachers' dirty looks. And I was, like, done, I was so ready for college. College was going to be different, or at least that's what I thought. And it's interesting because the emotions that I felt leaving school that day were similar to the ones that I felt after my confirmation mass. No more religious education, no more workbooks, no more memorize this or memorize that. I was completely done. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I still had plans of going to mass, and I loved my youth group. I grew up in church, but I was done with the whole learning thing. The idea of sitting in another classroom just like made me queasy. And I'm willing to bet that I'm not the only one who has felt that way. And in fact, I'm willing to bet for a lot of our teenagers getting confirmed, for them, they're excited that when it's done, no more religious education, no more sacrificing a weeknight, and for some, no more going to Mass on Sundays. And it's not just teens that are rejoicing, it's some of the parents who don't have to drag their teens to another activity. It's the youth minister or the DRE who's relieved that they survived another season of reluctant participation. I mean, everyone is happy to get it done, which if you think about it, is kind of odd. Now, I don't claim to be a biblical scholar, but I've never seen that part of the Bible where Jesus says, congratulations, you're a disciple. No, instead he says something different. In Matthew 28, verse 19, he says, go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and know I am with you until the end of the age. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He's constantly telling us to keep going. So if that's the vision that Jesus has for us in our faith journey, shouldn't we see confirmation a little differently? I mean, instead of seeing it as an end of something painful, we should look at it as like the beginning of something amazing. We should look at the confirmation preparation process as a journey and situate the sacrament in our collective understanding where it properly belongs as a sacrament of initiation. So basically what I'm saying is there is a paradigm shift that needs to happen in order for confirmation to be embraced as a sacrament and not just another ritual, not just like a graduation. And that comes from having clarity around the vision. And so if the vision is clear, if the vision for confirmation preparation is clear, it becomes more than a graduation from religious education. It becomes something more than anyone can imagine. We just need to treat it like something more. Basically, the mindset is you have to do this. And when I first meet with parents and teenagers at an information meeting, when we talk about enrollment for the sacrament of preparation for the sacrament, I say to the teenagers, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. And in their mind, I'm the one person, parents are thinking like, I'm the one person that they can count on to take their side. And so if all of a sudden I'm going to say, you don't have to do this, they're going to freak out. They're going to freak out and say like, wait, Chris, you're our last shot. And I would love to deliver for parents. I would love to deliver for them the problem. The problem, though, with that is it's not up to me. See, every candidate has a choice. And that's why we say, you don't have to do this. It's a reminder that the next generation, that all of us have free will, and we're in control of that next step. And when you tell people that they don't have to do this, it removes a burden. And you're telling them that this is a choice and that they control the decision. When you empower the candidate, they'll respond with openness to what you have to offer. So instead of saying you have to do this, start saying to people, you get to do this. You get to do this. When you go from you have to you get to, it's huge. You're changing a paradigm. It not only puts the control back in the hands of the candidate, it creates the perception that they have a right to choose. The question you and I need to answer for them is, what do they get by participating? Now, I know that might sound like an odd question, but if you think about it, a lot of the things we do it because we know there's a return on that. I play a sport, I get a trophy. I go to school, I get a diploma. In every other club, class, and activity, there's some kind of tangible reward for their efforts. When it comes to confirmation, the end result is treated a lot like a graduation. The first question I get from parents a lot of times when we're planning preparation is, when's the confirmation mass? And I get it, because people want to invite family and friends from out of town. They want to celebrate this accomplishment of completing faith formation. But again, you and I know that confirmation is more than a graduation. In fact, you and I know that it's actually the beginning to something huge, and that's why every program needs to invest in these next 4 areas that I'm going to talk about. So area number 1, it's right up there on the screen, it's a clear path. So most people inquiring about confirmation preparation, they want to know the plan. They basically want to know the plan to your program. They want to know what to expect, what are the requirements, what are the things that they have to do. Well, my recommendation is, when you're creating a clear path for Confirmande, for candidates for confirmation, make sure you start with an application process. It's in the application process where you really can get to know the candidate before you even start in anything. And it should be more than just like a name and phone number and address. Take advantage of the situation where you have their captured attention to get to know a little bit more about where they are in their faith journey. So in an application process that we designed when I was at Nativity, we asked the students and the parents to write a 500-word essay. Now, 500 words sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's really just a couple of paragraphs. But we wanted them to write a 500-word essay to answer a few basic questions. So we asked one question to the students, and that question was, what type of disciple do you want to be? And basically the reason we asked that question is we wanted to gain their perspective of what it meant to be a follower of Christ. Like, had they ever heard that word disciple? Like, had anyone ever talked to them about that term disciple or follower of Jesus Christ? So we had them write that down in a 500-word essay. Like, what does it mean? What type of disciple do you want to be? The second question went to the parents. And so we asked parents, well, why do you want your teen to do this? Why do you want your teen to be a part of this journey? Now, that might seem like a simple or obvious question to ask parents, but I mean, we got a whole bunch of different answers. For some people, they were doing it because their parents made them do it. For other people, they saw the value of confirmation and they really wanted their teen to embrace the grace that comes with it. For other parents, it was just something they felt like they had to do. They didn't understand the reasoning. No one was pressuring them, but they just felt like it was one of those things that they had to do as a good parent. And so we use these essays not as a way to judge whether or not someone should be in the process, but we use it as a way to get to know them. Now, if we did see something like in an essay where a teen said, hey, I worship Satan, then we'd be like, all right, maybe you're not ready for the process. But we use that application, especially those essays, to really get to know where the candidates were and their families were in regards to their faith journey. And then we would actually ask a third question, but this would actually happen after enrollment, after the application process is done. And we used a visual aid that we adapted from something that those of you who use Alpha Youth might be familiar with. We took we created this picture, and as you see, it's a swimming hole and or a lake, and basically we asked the candidates and parents, you know, if the lake in this picture symbolizes a relationship with God, who do you best relate to? And so by asking these questions, it allowed us to see how close they were to God and what they saw their relationship with God looking like, where they saw themselves in that journey. We basically wanted them to, you know, see their perspective on the sacrament, what the conversations at home have looked like, and where they see themselves when it comes to a relationship with God. And then this allowed us to set the table for where we wanted to take them. And then that's when we would ask them this last question, which is, who do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? We used to just ask, who do you want to be, but we felt that, you know, that was too much of a question where they couldn't think far enough ahead. And so we wanted them to think about who they wanted to be in 5 years. And it's a fun question because it involves dreaming of, it involves dreaming of more than just what do you want to do. What do you want to do? That's like tangible goals. That's like what kind of college you want to go to or job you want to have. Asking who do you want to be means searching one's soul more deeply. And so we asked that specific question because we wanted teenagers to cast a vision for themselves. We wanted them to start peeling back their gifts and talents and flaws that God had planted in them and take a good look at who they were and who they are. So before we had them before we fill them with any kind of information, before we took them on any kind of catechetical journey, we wanted to help them discover what was already there. We wanted to see what was already there. And so after the application process and the student enrolled, the rest of the path is like this. We basically start the journey with a retreat. Many times programs will put the retreat in the middle or towards the end. I believe a retreat is a great way of kicking off the journey. It's a jump start and a way of setting the tone. And while you can create your own retreat, one of the things that I've done before is outsource the retreat by taking students to events like, you know, Franciscan University has their high school conference, or, you know, there's Fan the Fire or other Catholic conferences where students can have this kind of retreat experience. And we did that at the beginning. Then after the retreat, the next step is we started to partner the candidates up with their mentors who they would meet with over the next 10 months. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so then they would start to get closer to the end, and we wanted them to start reflecting on the journey that they just traveled. And so after meeting with their mentors for 10 months, we basically brought them together and wanted them to reflect on that. And one of the ways you could do that is through a pilgrimage or gather them together and break them down into small groups. But what worked for us was this reflection letter. This reflection letter that served not just as an opportunity for them to look at the journey, but it was also an opportunity for them to, for us to learn a little bit more about the program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. But the reason you need a clear path is because it's going to help everyone know what to expect. It's going to help everyone take that next step. It's going to help everyone understand where they need to go. And if the path isn't clear, if the path isn't clear for people, then they're going to get frustrated and they're going to wonder whether or not this is worth it. So the first area we need to address is whether or not you have a clear path. The second area are your mentors or your small group leaders, or basically your catechists or your volunteers or your leaders, but I want to focus mostly on mentors and small group leaders. When it comes to a structure, I believe there are two effective models for confirmation. You can do a small group-based model or one-on-one mentoring. And that depends on a lot of things, mainly, child protection guidelines by your diocese and your parish, amount of volunteers you can get, or even the space that you have. But those are the two models that I strongly recommend. When it comes to small groups, you want to make sure that there are adults and not peers. While peer ministry is great, for a sacrament like confirmation, you really want adults pouring into teenagers. The small group leaders, as adults, they can share their wisdom. They can facilitate conversation. They have a little bit more patience. They're not worried about how the teens perceive them as much as another teenager might. And they have experience on what it means to build accountable relationships. And so it's through small groups you can create a deeper community that can later impact your youth ministry as well. Now, while small groups is an effective model, it can still be easy for one of your candidates to get lost in the group, to glide over a good bit of soul searching. So the second approach, if you want to make sure that you're tackling every single candidate, is to look at one-on-one mentoring or one-on-two mentoring. All right, in this model, you basically have men and women meet one-on-one with a candidate or one-on-two with two candidates at the same time, so really, really small groups. And like small group leaders, the mentor is there to share their wisdom, engage in conversation about faith. However, again, done at a much smaller ratio. And instead of meeting at a set night at the parish, with mentoring, you can meet in a variety of different places. You can meet in a public place like Starbucks or Panera. And, your mentor acts more like a coach, more than a small group leader or a catechist. They're like a coach for the next generation's spiritual journey. And believe it or not, that kind of paradigm actually is quite attractive, because if you think about the teens, a lot of them have specialty coaches. They have coaches for sports. They have coaches for music. They have coaches for, for drama. They have coaches on top of maybe their teachers or other things for these special skills that they have. So why not for faith? But no matter which strategy you choose, you want to make sure that the men and women that you're picking to be mentors or small group leaders are people you love and trust. I mean, they need to be men and women who not only love God, love their faith, but they love the Catholic Church as well. And here's the thing, they don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be perfect. They need to be someone that you can point to and say, you know what, I think that they're a role model for the next generation in our parish. They're a role model that I want these young men and women looking up to. In a way, the mentor or the small group leader is kind of modeling for the candidate what a sponsor should do. All right, so how do you find these people? Like, do these people even exist in my church? I know some of you are thinking, like, great, Chris, like, okay, where can I find them? Well, as long as there's people in your church, whether they're 99 or 19, you have potential candidates for mentoring and small group leading. So here are a few tips that I've found work for me. First is find them by referral, all right? Ask people who are already involved in the parish, ask your coworkers if they could recommend someone that they feel is maybe a good role model for not just the next generation, but a good role model in their faith. They don't have to necessarily like teens. They just have a love for God and a love for the local church. Find those people. So ask for referrals. When you find a referral or come across someone's name, interview them, but also get to know them in that process. Don't just make it an interview and see if they're competent. Make sure that they have a thirst for the vision that you're creating for your confirmation program. So find men and women who are already actively involved, sit down with them, take them out for a bite to eat, a cup of coffee, share with them why you love youth ministry, and also mention like who referred them to, and the reason you need to interview your mentors and small group leaders is because, again, you want to make sure that the personalities they have are going to mesh well. Now, I wish I could say to you, hey, here's an exact program, use the Myers-Briggs or, something like that to help you match up mentors with your candidates. But it's just something that you have to get a feel for. Something the more you do, the better you're going to get at it. And granted, I've made some bad decisions before where someone I thought would be really dynamic with youth or the next generation really wasn't. But the more you work at it, the better you're going to get at identifying possible mentors and small group leaders for your confirmation candidate. And here's the other thing too, is again, it shouldn't be that complicated. You're not looking for perfect people. You're looking for men and women who just, again, love God, love, and love the local church and love their faith and want to share that with someone. And their responsibility is to, share that not just with the candidate, but also share that with the parents, communicate with the parents. And if you equip these mentors and these small group leaders, not only are you going to give these students relationships that are going to last for a long time, but you're going to give yourself the margin as you have to communicate all these other things like, confirmation rehearsal date or deadlines for certain requirements and things along that line. So first area, again, is the path. Second area are your mentors and your small group leaders. The third area are your resources. All right, so when it comes to confirmation, we're commissioning teenagers to go into the world and utilize the gifts of the Spirit to spread the good news, right? So to prepare them for the journey and to take on the grueling challenges, you need to make sure they know how to grow on their own. All right, so it's not about filling their heads with all this information. It's about giving them the tools so that they know how to continue to grow on their own. And St. Paul, he knew this. He knew this well, and he knew how important it was for his followers to understand how to grow on their own. And so in his letters to the Philippians, he writes this. He says, "So then, my beloved, obedient as you've always been, not only when I'm present, but all the more now when I'm absent, work out your salvation with fear and trembling." See, Paul knows he's not going to be around forever, and he knows that in order for these churches that he's established to continue to grow in their faith, they need to know exactly what working out your salvation with fear and trembling means. And we should be telling this to the next generation. We need to be telling this to our teenagers over and over again. You know, it's difficult enough for them while we are in their lives, you know, to teach them about Christ. So our job, in part, is to try and ensure that they have the right spiritual habits now, so that when they move into the world and they don't have us, they don't have their parents, they don't have the safety net of the local church that they grew up in, that they have those spiritual habits to continue to grow in a relationship with Christ. So what are those spiritual habits? What are those disciplines that we should be instilling into our young people? Well, there's so many that it can be overwhelming. You know, a couple of years ago at Nativity, we had focused on 5 spiritual disciplines that we called our next steps. And that was to serve, tithe, engage, practice, and share. And basically, the reason we came together as a staff is we wanted to make sure that every child, teenager, and adult were talking about these steps. We're looking at incorporating these steps into their life. So, for example, in early elementary school age kids, they're introduced to the steps in their regular faith formation. As they got older, these steps were defined and then discussed in the youth ministry. And then when they hit preparation for confirmation, our hope is that when they see these steps, which they've learned, you know, in earlier years, that they're ready to make those personal. And this is especially effective in mentoring. However, it still works in a small group setting. But it's during preparation where the mentor or small group leader helps the candidate work on these steps independently. It's essentially teaching them how to own their faith. So what are, like, I know I mentioned these steps briefly, but let's take a deeper look at them. Well, the first one, again, is serving in ministry and missions. I mean, this step is about becoming more active in the faith community through serving inside the church building and serving outside the church building. Ministry, we defined it as serving inside the church building. Missions was serving outside the church building. And basically, the church needs to do an excellent job of providing opportunities for adults and teenagers to serve within and beyond the local church. So you want your candidates right in the thick of it. So ask them to make a commitment to one of those ministries or mission opportunities during their preparation. And don't make it about clocking hours. It's not about, you know, clocking 40 hours. Jesus didn't say to his disciples, okay, after you clock 40 hours of service, then you are my disciple. No. He just told people to go out to love one another just as God had loved them. And so that's what we want teens to do. So don't worry about clocking hours. Just try to find opportunities where they can get involved in serving on a regular basis. All right, the next one, tithing and sacrificial giving. Basically, I think this is like kind of like a rare one that we don't talk a lot about in youth ministry, which is really a shame because, you know, tithing is a huge deal. We need to teach students about tithing, not because it necessarily funds the local church, even though that is really important, but it's a huge part of our relationship with God. You know, in fact, the Bible talks about money like I think like over 8,000 times. It's one of the most talked about subjects in Scripture, yet we don't talk about it enough. You know, and it's one of those spiritual habits where God actually tells us to test him on it. He says in Malachi 3:10, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, and see if I do not open the floodgates of heaven for you and pour down upon you blessings without measure. So basically, we need to help teenagers see that they have a relationship with money and how that impacts the relationship they have with God. And this takes a lot of patience, and it leads to some interesting discussions. But if you can get your teens tithing now, it'll be a whole lot easier than waiting until they're adults. Because think about it. If they're coming across $10, it's a lot easier to give over 10% of $10, right? $1, than it is to give over 10% of 100,000. So we want to raise givers. That third one, engaging in small groups, right? Faith is personal, but it isn't private. Teens need to learn to grow with their peers. And while you might provide small groups during preparation, it's important to start looking at building a small group program as a part of your regular youth ministry. I mean, events are good. I like, you know, events and everything with youth ministry, but they're not sustainable if you don't build a small group program. So you need to provide opportunities outside of confirmation prep where teens are getting together in small group setting and, you know, connecting with other people that are focused on Christ, forming those Christ-like relationships. And if you have questions about building a small group program in your parish, feel free to reach out to me. Just email me at info@christopherwesley.org or go to marathonyouthministry.com, and I'll share with you some tools that I'm using to help people build small group programs. But small groups are so key as a spiritual habit. All right, that next one is practicing prayer and the sacraments. Practicing your prayer life through the sacraments, through scriptures, through quiet time. I mean, here we could go on an endless list of all the things we want teens to know about prayer. And so what I would encourage parishes to do is just think about a couple of ones that are a huge part of your parish culture. Like maybe you do rosary before daily mass. Maybe you have Eucharistic adoration once a month or every week on a certain day. Introduce those kind of prayer habits into the next generation. And maybe that's providing an event. Maybe if you have a mentor or small group leader, it's pointing out, hey, this is when we do reconciliation. This is when we do Eucharistic adoration. This is how you do the rosary. But giving them those tools and habits where they can learn how to listen to God and communicate with God as well. And this is going to be huge because this is going to help teens deal with those everyday occurrences that happen in their life, those negative things that happen, whether it's a friend who betrays them or parents who are going through a divorce, or maybe they lose a loved one and they don't know how to deal with that. When we can show them how sacramental life and how prayer is a huge part of relying on God, on leaning on God, and letting God lead us through these situations, then that's going to be a huge habit that they can take with them forever. And then the last step that we talk about, again, is share through invest and invite. Sometimes the big hurdle to evangelization is the actual word evangelization. As you probably noticed, I stumbled over that word. I mean, first, and most teenagers don't know what that means. Secondly, it's a word that sounds really churchy and intimidating. And so to overcome those obstacles, one of the things that we did at Nativity was break down the step of evangelization into a simple three-word strategy. And that strategy was invest and invite. So we wanted to teach teens to find someone in their school or community who didn't know Christ and to build a relationship with them. And then we encouraged them to pray for an opportunity where they can share their faith or invite their friend to church. And while we do not have while there weren't a lot of events like outreach events, we believed that the weekend mass and then our regular student programs were environments where a non-Christian could walk in and feel comfortable and welcome. And so all these steps, again, are important. And, granted, it's a nice acronym, STEPS. Doesn't mean you have to do it in that order. You can mix it up. It doesn't even mean you have to do those exact 5 steps. You're more than welcome to take those. But, basically find those habits that you want reinforced throughout the fabric of your parish and your church. And find different ways where they can be reinforced. That might be in the homily, that might be in ministry trainings, in your small groups, in faith formation. Anytime you can communicate to parishioners, think of ways that you can reinforce these steps, not just in confirmation, but in faith formation before and faith formation afterwards. And after spending a year engaging in these spiritual steps, you want to make sure that they have closure and that they're able to continue on in their faith journey. And so the fourth area that we'll talk about is how to wrap it up. How do you wrap up the confirmation process? Our archdiocese here in Baltimore asks that each confirmation candidate write a letter to the bishop describing his or her journey. And so as we prepare them for writing this letter, we ask teenagers to be honest and share with the bishop what has changed in their lives during the year of preparation. And so one of the things that I've done before is that essay that they wrote at the beginning of preparation when they enrolled, I share that with them so that they can see what they were thinking when they applied to confirmation preparation and where they are today. And it's really interesting to read some of these letters, and to tell you the truth, I was a little nervous to give them to the bishop the first time I told students to be honest and brutal about that. But what we find is that these young people, they reflect on their journeys and it brings them closure. It brings them closure and clarity on what needs to happen next. We also have them discuss their next steps during the last meeting candidates have with their mentors or their small group leaders. We look at how they are still involved, who they've chosen as a sponsor to stand with them during celebration of the sacrament, and what obstacles might stand in the way of achieving their goals for discipleship. And one thing we stress and is important is that even though the regular meetings between them and their mentors might end, that the relationship is not meant to end, that the mentor can still be a resource in their life as they continue to grow in their faith journey. And we've seen candidates long after receiving confirmation reach out to their former mentors. And it's a sign that they still feel connected with the local church, and it's a value we want them to embrace for the rest of their lives. And if you, when you purchase a copy of Rebuilding Confirmation, we have a couple of those letters in there, and it's just amazing to see some of the life change. So that's kind of like what was done at Nativity, and actually, one thing I'm doing new in my life, I'm a part of a new parish, is looking at how we're implementing those things here. But I'm sure most of us, or many of us, are trying to think like, okay, how do I rebuild my confirmation program? How do I build a confirmation program? Because the one I have isn't exactly doing a great job. Well, the first thing that you need to know is that it takes patience and it takes persistence. It will take time, because what you're doing is you're introducing a new paradigm. I mean, when it comes to confirmation, just think about your own relationship with preparation. Think about the relationship that a lot of your volunteers have with confirmation. Think about the relationship that the parents of the teens have with that. You're changing a paradigm. People, even though they might want change, are going to be more comfortable with what they know, and they tend to resist change just as a matter of course. So to bring them along, what you need to do is this. You need to identify your disciple. What is the ideal disciple? Like, just imagine someone who goes through your confirmation process and everything works out according to plan. What are those habits? What are those qualities, those characteristics that you want your young disciple to embrace and own? Again, you can take that now, the acronym STEPS that I shared with you, and you can use that. But make a list. Work on this with either your parish staff, or maybe a couple of other youth ministers in your area. But take that list, flesh it out, even if it means developing a story. Like, what does that ideal disciple of Jesus Christ look like? And basically, what are they doing after they've received the sacrament of confirmation? And it's going to give you a clearer image of where you want to take people. And when you know where you want to take people and you share that with people, it's going to serve as a motivation tool. And it'll help take them from, oh, I have to do this, to I get to do this. Next thing is develop your toolbox. After you decide which spiritual habits you want your candidates to possess, such as the 5 that I shared with you before, start looking at which tools you can introduce to them to help them get there. Again, there's an endless amount of resources out there, but think about ones that your parish has quick access to. Think about ones that are simple to teach and that you can give away. I mean, build a catalog of resources like devotionals and Bible studies and service opportunities, and make them available to your candidates through the small group leaders or mentors, and make them even available to the parents. And while there, again, are limitless options, try to narrow it down to, I would say, maybe no more than 4 or 5 per habit or characteristic. All right, third thing is build your team. Anytime you shift to an entirely new paradigm, find people who are committed to work through its messiness alongside of you. All right, I'm not here to say that, hey, when you make change, everyone's going to be on board and everyone's going to be so excited and they're going to high-five you and throw you a huge party and say, yeah, you did it, congratulations. No, you need people who are going to be there, who are going to help you get up after you've fallen. They're going to be there to allow you to cry. They're going to be the people who are going to bring you that big bag of chips, when you need comfort the most. I mean, that's at least for me. But you need a team who's going to help you think outside the box, who's going to encourage you to face those obstacles, who are going to help you, just come up with new ways of raising next generation disciples. And when starting out, you need people who are going to help you dream and who are going to help you succeed. All right, 4th step, start out small. All right, you may feel an urgent need to switch over the entire program right now, but that is likely to overwhelm everyone, almost everyone. So start out small. So even if you have a current program that you are just not happy with, start with a test group on the side. Find a few leaders or teenagers and their families willing to take on that challenge. And after you run through an entire season of preparation, build that group up a little bit more. Bring other people in, get feedback, talk about what worked and what didn't work. Start small and gradually build that into your current program. And if you're successful the first time around, repeat those things that work and continue to build on your success. But start out small. And the last thing is, do not do it alone. All right. So on top of building a team, it's good for you to get outside help. And actually, that's why I'm really happy to announce today this new little project that I've started with Marathon Youth Ministry called MYM Huddles. All right, what's an MYM huddle? Well, basically, it's a master class, and it's a master class for youth ministers, DREs, pastors, anyone who's in charge of leading preparation for confirmation. And it's a 6-month course, and basically, once a month, we'll gather, and there'll be a video lesson. There'll be monthly Q&A with me. There's going to be community interaction with other participants, and it's going to be a great opportunity for you to work with other people who are focused on making confirmation more than another graduation. And we'll not only go through the book, but we'll dive deeper into some of the some materials that I've worked and I've used. But this isn't just about me. This isn't just about my knowledge and my wisdom. It's also about getting ideas from other people and networking with other churches. And so again, MYM Huddles, as you see, registration is going to open up February 7th, and it will continue until February 21st. But here's the thing. If you're a subscriber of Marathon Youth Ministry of the site, you already know that there's a special deal going on with this huddle, right? And I don't want you to miss out on that. So if you haven't subscribed to marathonyouthministry.com yet, go there, subscribe today before February 7th, because there's a special deal only for subscribers up until that point. And I really want you to take advantage of it, especially for those of you who are going to jump into this Marathon Youth Ministry huddle. So if you're interested in learning more, go to marathonyouthministry.com, subscribe, or wait till February 7th and go back to the site, and there'll be more details on registering and being a part of that group. But anyway, it's important to remember that confirmation is not a checklist, right? It's getting your teens ready for the real world. I mean, it might feel like the biggest pain in your side, and I get that. It might feel like this unsolvable puzzle, yet it has so much potential. Do not be afraid to challenge the system that's in place. Do not be afraid to challenge that system. If this part of youth ministry is ignored, your church will continue to produce future former Catholics. Make confirmation relational. Make it intentional. Make it about initiating your teens into adult discipleship with spiritual habits that will sustain their religious faith. And in the end, you'll discover you're not only preparing candidates for the future, but positively influencing the parish community in which you are serving. Now, from time to time, you might wonder, am I making a difference? And that's when it's important to have those letters. That's when it's important to sit down and look at some of the stories of candidates who have been through before. And you might wonder, am I making a difference? And the answer is yes. But you don't have to go through this beautiful process in pain. Remember, even you and I do not have to do this. We get to do this. We get to provide an opportunity where the next generation gets to know Christ just a little bit deeper. Thank you very much, and Jared, I'll pass it over to you and Christina for Q&A.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Chris. Pull up the screen here so you guys know what to... Good. So hopefully you can see that here. I'm going to pull up just to remind you where you can ask the questions in the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel. It's already, see a few of you already are throwing some questions in there, which is great. Before we look at those, Chris, just want to say thanks for offering up your insights and your inspiration, and I think the challenge to do things a little bit differently, which is I think what we all need is a little bit, like you said at the very end, is doing things, supporting one another and our ability to do a little innovation. I think that's so critical in this church today. So thank you. One thing actually on Twitter, I was just kind of checking the posting a little bit earlier, and somebody already responded, and I was kind of waiting for this question, but one of the most popular, I said we shouldn't say most popular, one of the ways that dioceses are kind of compensating for this graduation unfortunate way of looking at confirmation is to do this restored order and to do confirmation, younger, and essentially with babies, and attach it more to baptism like it has been in centuries past. So I know you have a little bit about this in the book, and any insights you want to give to people that are considering that, or anything else, any other insights you'd want to offer there?
Yeah, it's interesting because as I mentioned too, I've started in a new parish, and actually one thing that's different between this parish, St. Joe's in Cockeysville, versus Nativity and Timonium is it's done in 8th grade, where I mean, personally, I got confirmed in 10th grade, and Nativity was 10th grade. So I'm learning a little bit different things about different age groups. With Restored Order, you know, I go back and forth on how I feel about, you know, doing it at that age, but I think regardless of when you do confirmation, the real important thing is how successful is your children's ministry and your youth ministry outside of sacramental prep. Because if that's not healthy, it doesn't matter where you put confirmation. You're just not going to have a good foundation, because if you think about it, youth ministry and children's ministry, it's like confirmation has an on and an off ramp to that. And if you have nothing that's preparing students for sacramental prep, and you have nothing for them to go to afterwards, then it doesn't matter what age you prepare them at.
Great point. We got some yeses coming in from people who are responding. Thanks. Christina, go ahead and grab one for us.
Let's see. They're coming in quickly. Let's see. One of them was actually just wanting to know if you could say your email really quick about contacting you about starting small groups.
Sure. Yeah, it's real simple. It's info@ChristopherWesley, WESLEY.org. If you go to marathonyouthministry.com, there's a way of contacting me through that as well. But it's just info@ChristopherWesley.org.
Thank you. And then there was also another question that regarding small groups was, what kind of size of a group would you recommend would be a small group?
Yeah, so I think a healthy small group for high school students is about 6 to 8 teenagers with 2 adults. All right, so 1 to 3, 1 to 4 ratio. And then I think with middle school students, you can go 8 to 10, a little bit larger. But once you get beyond that 10-person mark, then you basically have your own youth ministry right there. So.
That's a great point. Chris, just real quickly, why 2 adults? Why not just 1?
I mean, the thing is accountability. So, you know, one, if you're trying to create a consistent culture, you know, everyone has a life, right? And life happens, whether you get sick or you get busy or you just need a break. And so if you have 2 adults, you're building that accountability there. And then plus also, you know, you might have 6 teens in your group, and 3 of them might connect with one leader, and the other 3 might connect with the other leader.
That's great. Perfect. Question from Father Edward here. He's asking about, you talked about the steps, of course, but how do you, what are the essentials in the theology about confirmation that you kind of introduce to the kids to get them prepared for the sacrament? I mean, how do you work that into the program?
I mean, that comes through the tools. So when, you know, you talk about the steps, which are the general themes, but then you talk about the tools. So like when you talk about serving, the gifts of the Spirit, you know, when you talk about prayer, you know, especially with the sacraments, that's when you talk about sacramental life and vocations and things along that line. So it really comes into your toolkit, your toolbox that you're developing for those students.
Very cool. There was a question about for MYM huddles. Will you, if you are going through that, will that touch base on the adult confirmation candidates or just teens and youth ministry? You know what?
I haven't really thought about that, but if that person just wants to shoot me an email, I'd be more than happy to talk to them about the side. But mainly it's I guess like it's not really an RC. We wouldn't be talking mainly about RCIA. It would be more specifically confirmation prep. So if we're talking about solely confirmation, then I would say yes. But if it's more RCIA and, you know, especially with adults, it might not be for them.
Perfect.
I just want to point out a comment I think that Jeff has made here, just pointing out that you know, you didn't mention this, but or maybe you did, that the recruiting those mentors gives an opportunity for you kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone. You're able to, you know, evangelize or transform someone's faith as an adult, and not just the kids that are participating in the program, which is and it's also taking the burden off of you as the youth minister or the DRE. So, yeah, so that was a great comment here. Chris, just somebody, because somebody asked about it. What's your thoughts on using the confirmation programs that are out there? Do you pull from them? Because there's probably a couple of people asking whether it's the books, whether it's Chosen or Decision Points. That we have one here
I'm
at
actually
Underground
laughing
Press.
because I think there's a stack of Decision Point books behind me. Totally accidental. So it's not that I'm promoting Chosen and Decision Point, and there are great programs out there. And I would say treat those more like a toolkit. Like I think they've got great content. One of my thoughts with them is that it can be sometimes overwhelming for your catechist or for your volunteers to use a program like that. But I think as a short-term solution, if you want to spend more time on structure and less time on content, using things like Chosen and Decision Point are excellent resources in that regards. But I wouldn't say settle there. Try to create something that's more personalized to your parish.
Good, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Especially, I think as you're recruiting these mentors, you want to make sure that they're able to be good at doing the mentoring, doing the group leadership, and this kind of gets them the opportunity to get the catechesis across, get the information across that prepares the kids. So thanks. All right, Christina.
So to kind of piggyback off of what Jared had asked, or the question that was asked before about resources for small groups, do you have any suggestions for resources for those mentors or those small groups leaders?
Yeah, so if you're looking for just basic great books on small groups just in general, oh man, I'm going to blank on the name. Well, there's Help, I'm a Small Group Leader, I think by Laura Polich, and then there's Think Small. If you look up Reggie Joyner and Think Orange and everything, or L. Campbell, they have a couple great books. I know through my website you can get a couple of recommendations on small group resources. But I would have your leaders read those books. Another thing too is part of Marathon Youth Ministry Incorporated is providing trainings for people who are looking to build a small group program. So if you're interested, you can always reach me. But I would definitely go look up the name Reggie Joyner and L. Campbell, and they've got some great resources on small groups.
So Mike asked the question about, and maybe you can talk about this in general, you probably don't remember the extra percentage, but what percentage of teens preparing for confirmation came back to Uprising after confirmation? And maybe just talk in general, how did you bridge that gap between confirmation prep into, what you've got going?
So, when we first started, the drop-off was significant. I'd say like maybe out of a group of 60 candidates, we had, 5 or 4 come back, and stick with that. And stick with the high school program after that. By the time I left there, I would say that percentage had definitely increased to about at least 50 to 60% of the kids who went through confirmation program continued on with small groups. And that's also because a lot of the kids who went into the confirmation program were already involved in small groups. And it was something completely separate. Even though it was remote preparation, technically by the books, we didn't treat it like remote preparation. We treated them as 2 separate entities. And so we had actually small group leaders and confirmation mentors get to know one another. So every year, the small group leaders of that age group would get to know who their kids' mentors were. And then they could collaborate and said like, hey, Johnny mentioned that his parents were getting divorced. Did he say anything in small group? And they might be like, no, and like maybe we can connect together and just reach out to the parents and say, we're here for Johnny, and so when I think these kids started to see that there were all these adults and all these people who cared about them, they valued that much more than any game or activity or talk I ever gave. They valued those relationships that they had with the mentors and small group leaders.
Very interesting. Jeff had a question about how were you intentional about transitioning the youth into the adult small groups after confirmation? How did that transition work for the teens?
So after confirmation, which was in 10th grade, they were still youth small groups. They were still a part of youth small groups. The transition is more in the young adult world, and I wish I could say like it went 100% smoothly and everything, but you have people who move away, and just different things in life happen, and so that's such a huge transition period that after high school, while students who stayed local and went to college local and everything were definitely still a part of the small group community for adults, we couldn't control all of that. But here's the other thing too, is Nativity is really blessed. And here's another great resource, is Jackie Guidera, who's the director of small groups over at Church of the Nativity. If you go to churchnativity.tv and reach out to her, and then Rebuilt Parish Association, they've got great resources for adult as well as youth and children's small groups. So I would definitely check them out as well. And Jackie would be a really great person to talk to or reach out to about taking young adults and incorporating them into the more adult community.
Thank you.
So there's so many great questions coming in, Chris. I'm trying to pick some of the best ones here. Angela just asked about, you just kind of closed with this. You mentioned the resistance to change. Where have you experienced the most resistance to this approach? I'm guessing a lot of people listening in today are doing a specific, kind of the way they've done confirmation forever, but this is some resistance here. So what's the story you have for us here?
Man, if you try to make everyone happy, you'll only make yourself miserable, and you'll never succeed at making everyone happy. So the best thing to do is, and this might sound like the churchy answer, is you really need to trust what God is placing on your heart. Some of the big resistance. So for me, actually, when I got rid of the service hours and said, okay, we're not going to clock 20 or 40 hours that you have to do for confirmation, and you just have to do an opportunity. I thought in my head, like, parents are going to love this, and teens are going to love this. But I actually had a parent who was really upset about it and was like, my kid needs to have hours. So, it was just, and I guess it was maybe for school or something like that. And I was just like, well, that's not what we're doing. Retreat, that's a huge thing. I mean, at churches I've been a part of, you could do a retreat down the road and people will complain that's too close. And then you could do one, like we took kids to Franciscan University and Ohio is too far. And it's just like, it's too charismatic. It's not charismatic enough. Again, people are going to complain about that. And then there are going to be people, I remember I had change when, we were trying to change a little bit of the content and curriculum, and, parents were saying it's not enough catechesis or it's too much catechesis. So, I mean, again, there's no real specific examples except for the service hours one, because that's, I think, the most bizarre one that I can remember. But you're going to get change. You're going to get resistance no matter how you change it.
That's good. Let's see here. Deanna had a question about whether or not you recommend small groups and mentor groups to be divided by gender or mixed.
That's a great question, and yes, I do recommend that they're separated. Especially mentors, you have to. I mean, that's just one, safety and logistical, and plus, you don't want like a grown man meeting with a teenage girl in Starbucks. It just does not look good. Other than the obvious for mentoring, with small group leading, it's, granted you can have really great faith discussions between the opposite sex, but I think you're going to be able to go deeper, especially if a young man has a male role model and a young woman has a woman role model and everything, and there's some issues that you're going to be able to go deeper into that you might not necessarily be able to do in a mixed group, and that's really important, especially for confirmation, when it is about like the decision you're making in your relationship with Jesus Christ.
Probably have time for a couple more questions. Marie's got a great question, I think. My students have already gone through the sacrament. How do I get them back on board and get excited about their faith and not just more CCD prep?
Oh, man. I think with a situation like that, you really need to, again, just think of it, I don't want to say like, don't give up on them. Don't give up on them. So don't take this like I'm saying give up on them. But, while holding on to those students is important, you really need to focus a lot of your attention on the younger kids. So if confirmation is in high school, how healthy is your middle school program? How healthy are your freshmen and your sophomores? And with those students who have been confirmed, invite them back and maybe sell them on the fact that you're inviting them back to be a part of an experiment, a part of something bigger, a part of a movement, because that's what the church is, right? It's a movement. And that's what this next generation is looking for. That's what we're all looking for, is we're looking for purpose. And so if you can give them a clear purpose that being a part of the youth ministry is not, hey, we're going to wow you and entertain you, but we need you and we want you to be a part of something bigger, then they might come back, especially and be especially helpful in investing in the middle school or the younger generation.
I love that. I mean, if you want to invite them back in, you got to have something going on, and to focus on those younger kids, I think that makes perfect sense. To make sure you got a group that is excited to be there, so that when you go out to those people that have maybe, drifted away, you got something to invite them back to. So that's probably a lesson for all of church evangelization, all of church ministry in general. But Christina, why don't you give us the last question before we wrap up here?
Sure. So could you just talk a little bit about the application process and kind of how, for parents, how was that? When you asked them to write that 500-word essay, what kind of response did you get, and how did you react, and try and show them that this is a good thing for their child? So maybe you could talk a little bit more about the application process.
So actually, that was something that I thought I would get a lot of pushback on, like parents saying like, "Oh my gosh, why are you making me do all this work?" And actually, a lot of parents welcomed it, and what it served at, it became this really great tool because it allowed us to engage in dialogue with a couple of parents. In fact, we had this one student who was going through the process, and in the letter, the mother wrote that her son, she really wanted her son to understand faith, but like lacrosse was so much of a priority at that time. And so we saw that, and we were able to call the mom and just talk a little bit further about it, and we realized that the son wasn't really going to church at all. I mean, the family wasn't, other than this mother going to church, and that he was really struggling to get connected anywhere. So through the conversation, we were able to say, like, hey, why don't we just put a pause on preparation for the sacrament and really make our priority getting him plugged into either a small group or a service opportunity here at the church. And she really welcomed that, actually. It was like a huge burden came off her shoulder. And so when those sort of things started to happen, parents were talking about that. And actually, we would find that each year the essays that parents would write would become more and more honest and transparent, because they were like, oh, wow, this is a way of getting Chris's attention or the church's attention to really help me address kind of my concerns about my kid going through this process.
That's wonderful. I like how it's that kind of keeping the parent involved in the process as well, as opposed to them just dropping them off and letting the youth minister work everything out.
Good. Well, Chris, you got a lot of great comments, got a lot of great questions, a lot of praise, and thanks for the work you've done for us today. Real quickly, just again, where can they go to find out more about you and the work that you've been doing?
All right, so go to marathonyouthministry.com or christopherwesley.org, and it basically takes you to the same site, and you can subscribe to my blog. I post twice a week. Also, Facebook, we have a group called Marathon Youth Ministry. I do some Facebook Live there and everything. But if you really want intensive, coaching and help, you can always shoot me an email and we can set up a consultation. But I do offer one-on-one coaching, which is programmatic and professional development. But then again, too, February 7th, we're going to open registration for these huddles. It's a chance for you to not only have access to just some of the things that I'm learning, but also to other like-minded men and women who are working in the confirmation program. So definitely check that out. But it all starts by going to marathonyouthministry.com. And you can always follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Chris R. Wesley.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. Real quickly, before everyone heads out, I just want to offer this opportunity to get a copy of Chris's book, which is coming out right now. It's being shipped out and being sent to stores, and you can get it, of course, anywhere books are sold. But if you want to order it at Ave Maria Press, if you use the promo code webinar131 for today's date, by next Tuesday you'll get 20% off. So if you want to do that, go over to Ave Maria Press and use that promo code and get that discount today.
And before we sign off, we would like to thank our partners once again, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not familiar with their organizations, please check out their websites, which you can see displayed on the screen here.
So this webinar is being recorded. We'll post a recording of this presentation later today or tomorrow morning, and you can find it on YouTube, Vimeo. But all the recordings of all the webinars can be found at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos.
And please mark your calendars for the next webinar in the Professional Development Series. On Tuesday, February 21st, 2017, Dr. Bob Schutz will return to the series to offer a presentation on his latest work, Be Transformed. Schutz will help us see and share all the sacraments in a new and unique way.
Good. Well, thanks everybody for being with us. And Chris, thank you again for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
All right. God bless.